Duncan Blue, thank you for coming on the show. This is the Grizzled Geologist podcast. I'm your host, Keith Carden. And before we get started, remember, I'm a consultant, so is Duncan, and we're both looking for more work and more jobs. So be sure to reach out to both of us. I'll have contact information in the description for him. And if you're a regular listener, you know you can reach me at www.thegrizzledgeologist.com or my email at Gmail, which is the Grizzled Geologist. Duncan, thank you for coming on.
Well, Keith, thank you for having me. I've been following you for a while, and you brought up enough topics that both intrigued me and pissed me off at the same time. And I enjoy it as well. So I figured it's time for us to chat.
Well, that's great. And we had a little brief introduction, but this is raw and unfiltered. Duncan is a mudlogger, but not kind of what a lot of us think. He worked for some of the major service companies, and really, just within about 5 minutes of talking to him, I knew he had a bunch of good stuff to talk about. So I'm just going to kind of let him go, give himself a good introduction, talk about it, and off to the races. Nice to meet you, Duncan.
You bet, Keith. Thanks. Yeah, I like Keith said, I've been poking around this industry for a number of years. I started in 1976 when I got out of college. Unlike a lot of people, I do not have a degree in geology. I do not have a degree in engineering. My degrees are in business, but I was one of those guys that went to work for a bank and hated it, hated being cooped up. A girl I was dating at the time, her dad was an independent geologist out of Lafayette. And I said, Mac, I gotta do something. He said, oh, I can get you a job as a mudlogger. I said, great. I said, what the hell is a mudlogger?
Yeah.
He said, you'll find out. You'll find out. Don't worry about it. And I went to work for a little company called The Analysts. And they were based out of Houston, but our office was in Lafayette. It turns out The Analyst is what eventually became the MWD, LWD group section of Schlumberger. Schlumberger bought them. And so
Great exit strategy for them.
Because when they did that, they brought them on. I actually spent some time overseas working for them. I was in South China Sea, and worked all over the Gulf. Moved up into the company until I became the personnel director, I guess, so to speak. And then Schlumberger bought them out, and got called into my boss's office, and he said, I want you to introduce you to your new boss. He's from the Vector Cable Company, which is the company that built all the wire lines for Schlumberger. And he said, by the way, you're going to be needing to move to Houston, and you got to train him because he didn't know anything about the job. And I said, oh, that sounds great. So I immediately quit.
Off you go.
I went to work for Santa Fe Drilling. Okay. I worked for Santa Fe for a number of years as their contract administrator. Quite a difference. I had actually been on one of the rigs that Santa Fe owned as a mudlogger. And of course, the mudloggers, they always kept down in the chain locker somewhere, hidden away, eating a bilge. And within a week, I was on the same rig, and I was the contract administrator. I was out visiting all of our rigs, and I was up in the penthouse, and they woke me up at 5 o'clock in the morning with a hot pot of coffee and inviting me down to a special breakfast. And it was like going from one reality to another. It was amazing. But yeah, my background, I worked on and off in mudlogging from starting off as a sample snaggler, ended up going to, after the industry crashed in the 80s, I went to work for Baker in their mudlogging group, started all over again as a sample snaggler.
Really? Okay.
And completely changed careers, moved up with Baker fairly quickly, had a long 26-year career with them, did a whole lot of different things into product development, and I was what they called the Intech, which was the drilling group for Baker. Okay. I was their Marcoms manager, so I had a great team of marketing communication people working for me. We won a bunch of awards on all the ads that we were putting out and various things like that. Got retired from Baker after one of the things I was telling you, Keith, earlier. One of my pride and joys is the fact that I headed up the team that developed the Baker Hughes rig count.
Okay, yeah. And you got a patent on that, I believe.
Got a patent on it, and it was really, the Baker Hughes rig count had been around since the end of World War II, but it was in bad shape. It wasn't doing very well, so we changed it from what we called a counting system to an accounting system, where checks and balances, debits and credits. So if a rig moved out of one area, it had to be moving somewhere. So the system would keep track of where those rigs were moving so that our field sales guys could keep track of it and be on top of it immediately as a rig was coming in or moving out. Probably built the first CRM system with it because we had things in there where the field sales guys could put in notes as far as, this company man's a real good guy. He's a family man. His wife's name, his kid's name. He has a dog. He has a cat. He likes community coffee. He doesn't drink coffee. He drinks Coke. So these guys could swap notes and have information about their clients.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and that was visible to everyone internally into the company, along with a lot of other stuff that we innovated on, that automatically brought in permits from every state and sorted them out. Because if you've never looked at some of the old permit records, it was very difficult to decide what was a fake permit, which we called it. I had a partner years back.
Oh, so like they would file a permit without intending to drill it to kind of shake people loose?
Yeah, yeah.
Or okay.
We had a partner. We were doing some consulting and some financial stuff, and he said, "Hey, I own some property in St. Landry Parish, and we were starving. We had no money coming in, so we scraped a
Join the
couple.
club.
Yeah, they filed a permit, and then we ate off a salesman for probably almost a year, being taken wine and dine. So that was a lot of fun. So there were fake permits like that, then the real permits, and so we had a way of sorting through all that, getting all that done. So that
Well, and it's not like you had the same kind of comms that we do today, and internet connectivity.
Oh,
And
good Lord, no! I
right.
mean, if you wanted to I had a newsletter that I was putting out with that little consulting group that we physically mailed a letter with a stamp on it once a week.
So what was this system like? That's kind of was the first thing that I was thinking. Was it? I mean,
Baker
you didn't
system.
have Excel back then. I mean, it sounds like a kind of almost like a fancy Excel spreadsheet.
Well,
But what were you housing it in?
originally it was a fancy Excel spreadsheet, and that's where it was
Okay.
put up because there were no checks and balances on it. We ended up we worked on it for a year. We spent $1 million on it. So we developed an internal database that worked really well, that could be accessed automatically through the system. This was back before the term of machine learning or artificial intelligence came around.
Right.
But I guess we had some very early forms of artificial intelligence, and the system would know how to sort the data, and after we were building the queries properly and all that. So it was fairly sophisticated.
Well, I
And
mean, in any SQL database, you can have search terms and these kinds
exactly.
of things. I mean, that's basically probably what it was, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was kind of a super SQL database, but it used some other branches off of that as well.
Sure.
But
Sure.
it was a lot of effort, but it worked out really well. And the beauty of that is that it really revitalized what the rig count did and what it meant.
Hmm.
Um, and it opened my eyes because of that, I had a chance to talk to a bunch of investment groups because people didn't understand the rig count. A lot of people still don't understand how the Baker Hughes rig count differs from some of the others, and
Hmm.
in the fact that it is only counting, and it's still true. It only counts rigs that are actively turning to the right. If it's on a, when the button is pushed every Friday at noon, that here's the official count. If
Yeah.
it was a wireline run or a casing run, it was not counted as a drilling rig.
Okay.
Uh,
Interesting.
so yeah, there's and because there was always somebody said, well, there's more rigs contracting than that drilling. So yeah, they're under contract and the contractor's getting paid, but they're not making whole. Our rig count at that time, and it may have changed a little bit. That's been
Sure.
almost 20 years ago. It is quite. There was a little difference in there, and it's hard to understand. And that was part of the joy that we had in putting that together, is getting to meet a lot of people and getting involved in a lot of things. So from there, I went to work after I retired from Baker. After a bunch of different things, I went to work for Halliburton, doing kind of the same thing, heading up their mudlogging operation. Now, both companies there at that time,
And what did that entail really though? Like, so break that down for me from a big
yeah,
company, service company perspective. You ran their mud logging, and so you had mud logging units, you had services you could sell like, XRD, the science stuff, and then also you had to deal with people and trailers and running them. You were in charge of all of that.
yeah. I mean, both companies, Baker and Halliburton, at that time were about a $200 million a year operation
Okay.
in the
Just
mudlogging
your
group.
division, the mud logging part of it.
Just our little
Okay.
little
When did
department.
geosteering come in?
There was no geosteering at that point.
No,
You know,
not at that point, but do you remember about when that came in? Were you around?
oh, God, I can't. I don't know. I guess
Okay.
that
You didn't overlap with them much, it seems like.
no, no,
Okay.
no, not a whole lot. Because
Okay.
the reality is both Baker and Halliburton and Schlumberger even their mudlogging operations are very different from what we think of as mudlogging here in the U.S. In the
Yeah,
fact
sure.
it's nearly 100% aimed at deep water, high end, high cost.
Hmm.
Middle East is a little different, but even that is different than
So
mudlogging
you
here.
weren't running trailers, you were flying people out to location on the
Well,
platform.
yeah, we didn't have
Okay.
trailers. We had mudlogging units, and they were skid type units.
Okay.
We built a bunch of them. A bunch of them. We had, I think, at one point in time, I had close to 200 cabins scattered all over the world,
Okay.
and each of these cabins, because they were built. Uh, because of the type of operations that the Baker and Halliburton both ran, they were cabins that were capable of running both LWD and mudlogging out of the same
Okay.
cabin.
Yeah. So
To
you had
build one,
directional drillers and the mud loggers in there?
yeah, yeah, but even back then, if you think about deep water, you still don't do a whole lot of directional drilling
Okay.
or very simplified directional drilling
Okay.
anyway.
Okay. Well, I think I mean, I see all the deep water stuff. It's kind of one location. And once they get down, there's definitely directional work to kind of like get out and away, right? On the
A little bit,
ledge.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's more developmental work. Because back in that day, a lot of this was exploration work. So
Okay.
you drill vertical wells and then, make a big discovery. I've got a little vial of oil that was, I was on the discovery well for the old
I try
Bullwinkle.
to collect oil from everywhere I work.
Yeah, it was a little bit of oil from the original Bullwinkle project that Shell had.
Okay.
One of their big, it's Shell doesn't own it anymore. I don't know who has it now, but it
Yeah.
was, it was many years before any of that happened, became the big production systems that they have. But
Hmm.
the mudlogging, like I said, if you talk about moving a mudlogging trailer on location. Those little mudlogging trailers that they use here in the unconventionals, you spend $10,000 on a horse trailer and put an air conditioner in it.
Yeah.
The cabins that we were building cost over $1 million a
For
piece.
sure. All custom
Oh yeah.
and like a rail car kind of deal.
Exactly, and it's even more than that because they had to be uh, zone certified, properly zone certified. The fact that it had to be an A60 unit, which meant that a complete raging fire could be around it and you could survive in that cabin for 60 minutes.
Okay.
So fully pressurized and all the
Oh, wow. Okay.
backup systems.
Okay.
It actually was a because of the electronics in the cabins. It was a Faraday cage. We had copper
Oh, really?
wiring all through the whole system
So
so that
everything that came in had to be hardwired in. I'll
yeah,
be
absolutely.
darned. Your cell phone didn't work in there for sure, if you even
And
had one.
no, there was no such thing as cell phone. But yeah, you're 150 miles offshore Gulf of Mexico.
Right. That was in the
You ain't got
sour.
no cells out there.
Yep.
Uh, and this was the early days of satellites. We did satellite communication, but it was limited. You didn't have the firepower that you have today. But these are very big, expensive systems. Well, I'm
I mean, and it is just such a completely different world than I'm used to. I've
different.
never done offshore. I mean,
Yep.
I spent the last 6 years drilling 2 miles from my house.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a completely, my mud loggers could borrow my trailer if they needed to.
Well, exactly. So yeah, it's completely different. And once a mudlogging cabin was installed on a deep water rig like a drill ship or a semi, it was probably going to be out there for 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
Uh, and as such, we didn't have companies like Payson. They don't, where or
Or you could feed your data back to the main office
well,
live,
no,
essentially.
not only that, you had your own sensors, so we had to censor everything.
Okay.
I helped Amoco.
Well, here's the deal. A lot of the lot, Mike Wood, the Roji guy, and
Yep.
Kevin Banks, who came on, they both mentioned mudlogging in the 70s and early 80s was pressure control and everything else. Listen, I've been doing this a while, but I really didn't realize that they bundled the mudlogger with, ROP, and they were the ones doing all the reporting that way. That's crazy.
Well, not only that, both Baker and Halliburton, typically we didn't even hardly talk to the geologist.
Okay.
We had all of our sales efforts through the drilling engineer because I've given a presentation to SPE and several other groups before. Back in that day, there were two people in a mudlogging cabin. One was the geologist, the other was the data engineer.
Okay.
The data engineer is the guy who did all the things that are being done today with a lot of the software that's being run.
Hotco and stuff, you mean?
Well, yeah, Corva and AI Driller and
Oh, okay.
those
Yeah.
kind of things that we were keeping track of everything. We would run trip reports, and not
Mhm.
just the report of keeping track of the weight and the fluid being
Yeah.
displaced, but we were doing things like how fast can you run that BHA over a certain, how your running speed for either moving, coming in or out of the hole, keeping
Sure.
track of every drop of mud on the rig. So we were doing everything, all the calculations on pit movements and fluid
Sure.
movement across the pits and losses and gains and that type of thing.
Oh, wow.
Park and drag, we were doing all of that. Uh,
That's incredible. I mean, and listen, that's data I look at when I'm drilling. I mean,
yeah,
my live, I have my data streaming the whole time,
yeah.
watching torque and all that. I mean, it absolutely matters. A lot of geologists these days are disconnected from that.
Well, most
But when you're down turning to the right and there's a lot at stake, you start to really learn to, it's like music almost, being able to read, read your top code. So
Well, and Keith, I think that's the difference between what we're seeing today and where it came from originally. And I think it's a bad thing in the fact that back in that day, because you did have the data engineer and the mudlogger working for the same company, looking at all the same equipment, advising both the geologist and the engineer, a better operation was being run. I mentioned a lot of these software companies that have replaced that data engineer position. They're great companies. My son worked for Corva for a number of years. I got him a job over there. I know all those guys. They wonderful software. Several other companies like that do that. Great. The problem is it's another piece of software that the engineer or the geologist have to keep track
right,
of, and you can't watch it 24/7. Whereas back in the day, you had that data engineer that was out there watching all of that, and with a completely different independent set of eyeballs
mhm,
to help do those things. Some people say geosteers do that, but not really, because they're interested in hitting the target properly, working with the directional driller and making sure that a particular zone is stayed in or whatever. So they're
yeah.
not.
No, they
They,
have one directive.
yeah, yeah,
And listen, I've learned about this stuff because I'm going to be real. I'm more of an oil man than I am a geologist at this point. I drill vertical wells and, get in on stuff like that too.
yeah.
And no, it is nice to see that depth of knowledge and, these sorts of things. And it has, I would say, kind of gone away. And we are faced with multiple platforms and softwares to be able to deal with these deliverables. And you can keep going, but I mean, I understand the frustration there.
Oh yeah, because listen, put it in the hands of a drilling engineer. First of all, neither one of us are wet behind the ear kids anymore.
No, no.
We were there once and thought we knew it all. But a lot of these drilling engineers they're younger and extremely smart. Very impressed with this crop of folks that are out there. But
Yeah.
honestly, a lot of them have never been on a rig.
Hmm.
They don't have that grizzled experience that we have. That throw a kick in there. Yeah,
Yeah, I love it.
that comes from making mistakes and seeing a lot of different things happening. So
That's a big part of it, those mistakes, huh? Early on.
listen, a lot of them are scared, and
Yeah.
they won't admit it because they don't know what to do when something happens. Plus the
Yeah.
fact they're designing the next wells. They're looking at sometimes these guys are wearing one hat, wearing 16 hats with one head,
Yeah.
trying to be.
I was faced with that on my end from an office geologist standpoint, where you're expected to watch these wells, plan the wells, watch the wells, be a part of the subsurface and development team. But then you're still making PowerPoints for executives and,
Yeah,
and board meetings and, dealing with, because we all know the drama and the stuff that happens when we're drilling. So then you've got the curveball, coming in from the side. I can
yeah,
say my experience with Revolution, listen, I'd already kind of shown my exploration chops. It turns out I like this kind of live action part, where there's drama involved. It's all day emails and communication. It really resonated with me. But, there should be, in my opinion, that kind of disconnect where, the geosteers are just focusing on keeping that rock in zone and not, we're like you were saying, they're not the ones keeping track of torque or anything like that.
Right.
They're just worried about azimuth, right? Yeah, azimuth and E. So,
Exactly. And honestly, I hate to say it, they're probably not that concerned about the geology or the
no,
hydrocarbon that's being searched after. Like you
right.
said, that's the ink, and that's all they're worried about. I've hit the target. I know where I'm supposed to be. And if you dumb geologists didn't, had drawn your map right, you'd be producing a lot more oil. About that, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the disconnect that we're seeing today, for example, I was at a meeting not too long ago that was put together by AADE or I don't remember who, it may have been an IADC meeting
Hmm.
where it was very well done in the fact that they had half the audience was geologists and asset people, the other half were drilling engineers.
Yeah.
And they kind of purposely set it up that way to get them to arguing. And it turns out that both groups are incentivized on the wrong things.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. For example, the drilling engineers are worried that, can I've got an AFE that I've got to meet because that's what I've turned in and that's the budget that I've been given. So I've
Yep.
got to meet or beat that AFE. I'm looking to put, a little tick mark on my resume saying I drilled a record well in the Bone Springs formation. It took 3 weeks to drill the last well there, and I did it in 7 days,
Hmm.
like, well, yeah, but did you get any oil and gas out of it? You know?
Right.
And so what the problem is, particularly the drillers, they're incentivized on the wrong things. And I think the entire industry incentivizes their operational people on the wrong. It should be on how much production have we gotten out of that well and how efficiently have we done it and have we done it within the right cost range?
Yeah.
Because that's what the shareholders are getting paid off of.
Well, and that's really, it ultimately does matter. And I agree with you in terms of, yeah, there are different incentives. Drillers, it's about time.
Yeah,
Geologists, it's about zone, right? But really, 90% of my channel and my success in this business has been with being able to actually lend that. And it really, what I would say is the impetus is on the geologists in this case, because we're the ones that are dealing in these more abstract concepts with these different maps and kind of a different vernacular even from the drilling engineers. And so I do think it's important for us to put the extra time and effort into explaining the geology part for the engineers to be on the same page. I mean, if you've listened, if you look at any of my podcasts and I talk about drilling, that's like the fundamental, aspect of what I do. And so while I understand it's in everybody's best interest and mostly the shareholders that don't care about us, that's in their best interest for us to save money and be in zone and for us to look good and garner the look of the people that are paying us. It's important to execute on those jobs because to them it's not necessarily the person behind it, it's just a metric. Did you beat
exactly.
AFE? Were you in zone?
Yeah.
And so, I agree with you. And there's always going to be a disconnect.
But Keith, at the same time, you can save yourself out of business. And
Yeah.
you get to the point where you drill these wells and you talk to a client and he says, I've got these wells I've got to drill. I'd like to know a little bit more about what's going on, but I don't want to spend a bunch of money on it because I've drilled 150 wells in this area and I think I know the geology real well and I
Yeah.
definitely know the pressures real well. And just as that's happening, somebody's running down the hall saying, "Oh, we have a blowout on, rig
Yeah.
7, and or
And
damn
they
it."
do minimize us quite a bit. And you're talking about, there is a lot of engineering and companies that kind of minimize the geologist role,
Yeah.
because you've got engineers that have a minor in geology and have, drilled and had experience with the rock, but having that geologist there. And then again, someone like, what you do, actually touching the rock, really understanding the reservoir. I mean, I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We were called rock lickers at some point in time for a reason. Sometimes we did lick the rock. I'll be honest with you.
Yep.
Is it
Yep.
soft? But
Yep.
but I think what's happening is, and a good example of that is when I was at Halliburton, I toward the end, before I was retired again from them, I'd gotten to know the pressure pumping fellow over there. In technology, well, in regular business, you become a vice president. In technology, you become a fellow. Okay, so it's
Yep.
in companies. Well, the fellow over the pressure pumping group came to me and he said, Duncan, he said, I got a problem. He said, I got some of my biggest clients beating me over the head saying that we're screwing up their frac jobs. I said, well, are you? He says, no, we're not. We're doing them right. And I said, well, what's their complaint? And he said, they're complaining that they're drilling the wells and they're getting really good initial production, and then the production's going to hell within 60 days, and they can't figure out so they're blaming the frac job. So I said, okay, well, I put a team together and we looked at 1,000 wells or more of different, varying formations, different type of well types, a lot of different things. And we discovered that although the geosteers, the geologists, and the engineers thought that they were in the right place, it turns out that they were in the wrong place. And by being in the wrong place, I mean that, yes, they were on the line that had been drawn, but
Mm-hmm.
the rocks were not the right rocks to be fracking.
Right.
High clay content. You can pump 1 million pounds of sand into a high clay content rock and it ain't going to fracture.
Right.
It's going to go somewhere.
I was talking about clay content in my earlier video today because I actually had a completions engineer on right
Yeah.
before you. So no, we were talking about this exact thing half an hour ago.
So how do you know that? Well, back in the day when exploration's happening and when companies weren't so concerned about, I can say, I save a penny but lose a pound, the old saying. I don't do LWD. Or you say, do you do LWD on your wells? Yeah, I do gamma. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not LWD. Okay, it helps your geosteer. It tells you something, but that ain't LWD. When you do,
Right.
my LWD worlds were pentacombos where you were running acoustic and nuclear, and you were running, formation pressures and fluid analysis downhole. One of the patents that I have, you're looking at that kind of stuff. So you think you know the rock that you're in, but you don't. Okay. And so some of the companies, rightly so, they started looking at XRD, XRF.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody complains. Well,
Really big in the shale plays because
yeah,
again, clay content is a
clay
huge deal.
content.
I'm a
But
kind of been more of an unconventional guy. We have to deal with clay, but it's a little bit different. It gets really particular when you get into the shales.
exactly, because the shale will look very, very, very much the same, but if it's got a high clay content, you're not going to frack it,
Right.
and stay open.
To screen
So
out, you've got to be in the right stuff, higher silica. And that's where, again, mudlogging, geology, core, doing the homework ahead of time and the rock mechanics and that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. So I think we've drilled ourselves into a quandary, and honestly, I think the unconventional that we made all of our money off of since I guess the late 90s, we're running out of that. There's still plenty there, but we've drilled all the easy wells, all the wells that.
Every time we had a downturn, every company I knew and worked for drilled their best stuff. So
Yeah,
it's always something to think about.
they're having to do reach outs. They're having to do a lot of different things. I'm old enough and have been in enough wells where I still think that there's the conventional wells, particularly Upper Gulf Coast, still have there's a huge future there if it's done right. Some of the states have screwed that up so badly with some of their energy policies and the lawyers and everybody else. Don't get me
So
started.
you're kind of talking shallow Gulf of Mexico, Gulf Plain.
Yeah, some shallow, but because if you look at the history of even that, I've got a chart somewhere that shows the price of oil. If you look from World War II up until about late 1960s, do you know what the price of oil kind of averaged at? $2.35 a barrel. Well, all of a sudden OPEC came along and things went crazy and price of oil shot up to $100 a barrel, or never did really reach that too much. Things
I
went
remember it twice though,
yeah.
since I've been doing it. So we've
Yeah,
crossed the buck a couple times.
it crossed it, but it never really averaged
It
out at
didn't
that.
stay. No.
But we made money on directional drilling didn't really come into play until about that time as well.
Right.
I've got a chart that shows a cross between vertical and horizontal, and where it crosses, that's when all the unconventionals started. That's where the unconventionals came in, the Permian, and those West
Well,
Texas.
it was up in Dallas first, right? And
Yep.
then kind of the Permian at the time. What I remember specifically going to the West Texas geological stuff, and I remember all these fence diagrams, and they were going in and talking about, well, we're basically drilling horizontals by fracking this, 2,000 vertical feet of Springer, Sprayberry, or Springer, it's
Yeah.
Oklahoma, Sprayberry, this sort of stuff. So we did see some shift in the Permian where they thought it would be a vertical thing, and then once they started putting the horizontals in, it was over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we learned that in Barnett Shale. They tried to drill conventionally vertical and frack it, and it really didn't have use.
no, and it was the same with the Cherokee Shale that's now in the
Yeah,
Western Anadarko and stuff now too. They
exactly.
thought what you did have is you had gas shows, you had live oil in the samples, but what you didn't have is visible porosity or anything
But
else like that. But
that's
it
right.
didn't prevent people from coming and trying to perforate and see what it would do. Long story short, those all turned into, hey, like especially in the Barnett, let's go sideways in it and break it up.
Well, bless our pointed little heads. The oil industry tends to be the dog chasing the squirrel. The shiny object.
Oh yeah.
Because if you look at the conventional market, particularly in the U.S., the Upper Gulf Coast, there's some other areas, but my experience has been all along the Gulf of Mexico border,
Hmm.
both inland and shallow water. That was the lifeblood of the oil and gas industry for the U.S. for many,
Hmm.
many, many years. And you drill a well out there, and yeah, it wasn't big and sexy and exciting and everything, but you get 200 barrels a day, and you get 200 barrels a day for 20 years.
Yeah, no, that's the most beautiful thing ever if you've ever owned oil production. I
I mean,
mean,
dude,
flat, no decline,
that's
an annuity. It's, that's
that's
beautiful.
that's mailbox money.
Yeah, but need
You
more of
drill
that.
you when you retire, but
Yep.
that's not happening anymore. The only way that production has stayed up, there's an old book that came out, I think, in the 90s, and you may have read it. It's called Funny Money,
Mm-mm.
and it was about the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma and during the first boom that we had, where everybody and his brother became an oil man, and the whole book was written about a little bank. I can't remember
Oh,
where it was.
was this Penn
Yeah,
Square Bank?
Penn
Yes,
Square.
no, it's, yeah. I didn't know the exact name of the book, but I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I mean
Yeah, no, the whole Penn Square fiasco was a big deal.
they brought down one major bank and nearly brought down another. And they were writing paper so fast that they were literally having people in.
No, anybody with a briefcase could get $1 million.
Yeah,
And so no, I've talked to a bunch of people from, a big fortunate part of my career is Oklahoma is a very tight knit community, and I've run in and worked with and dealt, had dealings with a lot of these old guys that lived through that.
yeah.
And in fact, if you go and watch my blowout video on YouTube, you'll see, they're telling stories. I mean, a lot of the time they're letting them blow out for the PR.
It was like the old Broadway play, The Producers.
Yep.
They oversold their production by
Yep.
like 200%, and they said we've got to find the worst play in the world that we can put on, and it was, and the name of the play was "It's Springtime for Hitler," and it was horrible, but it became such a huge success that they ended up in prison because they couldn't pay off the investors. But
Classic.
so it was, that was kind of the state of the industry back then. But I think the conventionals along the Upper Gulf Coast, I think they have another life, because if you look at the history of those wells, a lot of those wells were drilled uh, during World War II, and it was a major effort to, we needed oil for the war machinery,
Yep.
and so what they would do is they would, and there's a whole story about the oil men of World War II and how they really the unsung heroes, and how they
Yep.
supplied, they
They
actually helped
supplied the
win.
war machine. Yep.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that they would look at logs, as primitive as they were at that point in time, and say, well, look, there's a whole bunch of different zones here, but this is the one zone, because we're limited on the amount of steel that we can have. This is
Yep.
the one zone that we can perforate and get the most oil out of.
Yep.
So what they did is they drilled a bunch of those wells, got some great production out of those wells, but they bypassed a whole bunch of pay, both above, and then once they got down to that depth, they stopped. There's a lot of oil and gas below that.
I really like what you're talking about here. And there's still a lot I can do with an SP and a resistivity log. That's all you really need, to be honest with you. I know that's silly, but I do get OG like that at times. But honestly,
Yeah,
that would be a good topic to come and talk about,
yeah,
because I'd love to have you back on to talk about, kind of get
sure.
into this a little bit more, because it's new to me and nothing is more exciting to me than bypass pay and these types of opportunities and wells with SP and resistivity
Yeah,
logs.
yeah. Well, and part of the problem is you get deeper than some of those wells. The upper Gulf Coast is very nasty in the fact that it gets extremely hot and the pressures are extremely high.
Okay,
So a lot of the LWD tools and even directional tools that are being used today are outside of it's outside of the technology that they can't use them. I mean, I'm
really
talking 300 plus degrees, downhole. Uh,
interesting. Sounds like a geothermal opportunity also.
well, it could be, but there's
And
still
those brines are also chock full of lithium. Let's
yeah.
have you come back and talk about this a little bit. This is
Well,
a good topic, actually.
I'm not a geologist.
I
I
don't
know
care.
I know what lithium is on the periodic table, but that's as far.
Listen, one of the things out here in Oklahoma, it's different than like what you're saying, the Halliburton and all this. I'd say two or three of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life that are full blown executives in the oil business and never went to college for 1 minute. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I don't care if anybody went to college or what your
Well,
degree's in. If you know what you're talking about, I'm going to listen.
that's the old oil industry. The guys who
Yeah. I don't care what your degree says. I care about what you really know.
what can you do? Have you done that before? What did you
Yep.
learn? And let's go out and make some money. I think the industry itself has kind of lost that. I complained when I was younger that the damn bankers were taking over, and now they really have because of the fact that you can't do anything until you go in front of a committee.
Nope.
There's no such thing
Well, I
as
do. That's why I like keeping it small. I've
yeah,
been fortunate to have kind of relatively red tape jobs in the
yeah.
past, but I'm with you, man.
Well, but even on the service side of the company industry, both at Baker and Halliburton, I had a lot of great ideas. I hold six patents and all those kind of things, but I still had to compete with the money for what I wanted to design and develop.
Yeah.
I had to go in front of the bank, in effect, the corporate office. They had money to spend, but it
They had
was
the
it was.
purse.
Do we want to spend money on Mudlogger? Do we want to spend it on a rotary steerable system? Do we want to spend
Right.
it on a new kind of packer? So they had to make some decisions on what was the best bang for the buck, and it was, it got very political at times. It got
Yep.
contentious at times. But still does come down to that. Whereas as opposed to the old boy back in the day, I had a neighbor when I lived in Lafayette. He was a drilling engineer for BP, and he worked 7 and 7. And on his days off, he was always in his garage tinkering with this piece of equipment he was building. And I used to make, I'd bring a 6 pack of beer over and make fun of him while he was working on his system. We'd sit there and drink and have a good chat. And he said, "I'm going to make money on this one day." And sure enough, about 20 years later, I was an executive at Baker, and he comes walking down the hall, and I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "I just sold my system to your company for $120 million."
There you go. Well, it takes the dedication like that to make a deal like that, but that's awesome.
Yeah, it was a fluid extraction system where he could a series of centrifuges and different spinners and different, I don't know what the hell but it took the solids out of the drilling fluid so he could recover
Okay.
the good stuff of the drilling fluid and efficiently handle the solids in the fluid.
Mods. Yep.
So it paid off for him. A lot of people do a lot of things like that don't.
Yeah.
I grew up
I
across the
have a
street.
fear of that kind of thing, actually. Like, I don't want to
Yeah,
lose life.
I grew up across the street from the founder of Frank's Casing Crew. I don't even know if they're called Frank's anymore, but they were at one time the world's largest casing company. Mr. Frank would be in his garage cursing and beating on a piece of house and running his kids around and yelling at them and everything else. But they ended up going corporate a number of years back. That company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's the innovator that he sees the need, he works on it, and he develops it, and he either grows into a company or he sells it to somebody that he can sit back and retire.
Yep. That's the ultimate goal, is divestiture, actually. I don't want to ride anything till I die,
Well, that's right. Well, but some people
maybe.
have that desire to make a good company out
Maybe.
of it, and they've done well.
I picture relaxing at some point, but we'll see.
Yeah, you have to drink with a little umbrella. It's then on a beach somewhere. But of course, I don't drink anymore, and I hate beaches, so that ain't me.
There you go. Well, we all find what we like. But Duncan, this is a great podcast, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Sure.
Anything you want to add here at the end? I think we've kind of got where we wanted to get, and I'd be happy to have you back at some point.
Oh, absolutely, Keith. I enjoyed it. I think that there still is. We still have life. If you follow me on LinkedIn, please do. I'm well known for expanding on my thoughts. I don't have carpet on top of me pounding on the head anymore, saying you can't do that. So I'll say a lot of stuff that I'm not supposed to.
I love it.
So we have a future. The future's still bright. The problem, we're in a downturn right now. So what? I've seen a bunch of these. You have.
It's like my third one, third or fourth one already. You just kind of keep trucking. And the last one I made it. This one I at least had the ability to kind of float through.
Yeah.
Hopefully I get some contracting gigs in.
So to throw a little commercial in, you're right. I'm a consultant. I don't do a whole lot. However, I am open to conversations. If an operator needs somebody that can come in and help them evaluate different companies and are we doing the right thing, or a service company that needs some thought processes and that type of thing, I'm glad to step in and help do stuff like that. People ask, how much do you charge? I said, I charge what I want to charge.
There you go.
If I like you, I won't charge you so much, or if the project looks interesting, I won't charge you as much. If I'm bored, but you still think I need to do it, I'll charge.
I love it. I love it. Well, I will make sure that I put your contact information in the description. I may try and throw some stuff up on the screen. I'm getting a little more fancy on my interwebbings here. So
there you go.
Again, Duncan Blue, thank you so much for coming on. This is the Grizzled Geologist podcast. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like, hit the notification bell, visit my website, reach out to me if you want to come on the show. I'm looking for work also. I've got the tools we need to make some money. I would be a valuable addition to any team. Feel free to reach out. Thank you for coming on, Duncan. To all the mudloggers out there, stay clean. Thanks.
Thank you.
You have to